They found her body at dawn, face down in the frozen dirt, her dark hair tangled with blood, her dress torn like autumn leaves scattered by the wind. No one heard her scream. No one came to save her. And by nightfall, her name would be just another whisper in the long-haunted silence of the land. The bitter wind howled through the endless plains of Montana as Wana'ka, a young Blackfeet woman, clutched her mother's old deer-hide shawl around her shoulder. The scent of sage lingered in its worn fabric, a whisper of home, of a time before everything had changed. She had grown up hearing stories of the land, of the spirits that roamed free among the rivers and mountains. But now, the land felt heavy with grief, its sacred silence tainted by unspeakable horrors. Wana'ka had been just 16 when the soldiers came. They rode into the village on horses with eyes like ice, their uniforms pressed with the arrogance of men who believed they owned the world. The Blackfeet had signed treaties, agreements that were supposed to keep them safe, yet treaties were nothing but empty words to those who wielded power. That winter, her people were forced onto a barren stretch of land where the rivers ran dry and the bison no longer roamed. It was there, amidst the hunger and desperation, that the violence began. One evening, as the sun bled into the horizon, Wana'ka was gathering firewood when she heard footsteps crunch behind her. She turned, and before she could scream, a rough hand clamped over her mouth. The scent of tobacco and sweat filled her nostrils as she was dragged into the trees. 3 men, dressed in the blue coats of the U.S. cavalry, laughed among themselves as they tore at her dress, their breath hot against her frozen skin. She fought, but they were stronger. When it was over, they left her there, broken and bleeding into the earth, her sobs swallowed by the indifferent wind. Wana'ka never spoke of that night. In her village, silence was often the only protection left. The elders had seen too much death to believe in justice. Her mother, eyes hollow with fear, simply whispered, "Live, my daughter." And so Wana'ka did. She learned to hide her pain beneath layers of steel. But the anger inside her simmered, waiting for the right moment to burn. Years passed. The world changed, but not for her people. The boarding schools came next, stealing children from their homes and cutting their hair, stripping them of their names and their language. Her younger sister, Little Fawn, was taken away in the dead of night, sent to a place where priests with cold hands preached salvation while committing sins of their own. Wana'ka searched for her, traveling to the nearest town, where the white people walked past her as if she were a ghost. She found the school, its high walls like a prison, the scent of disinfectant stinging her nose. But Little Fawn was no longer the child she had known. Her eyes, once full of laughter, now held only silence. By the time Wana'ka was 25, she had left the reservation, chasing whispers of justice in a world that refused to see her. She moved to a city where the streets were filled with lost souls, native girls who had come looking for freedom but found only danger. The police didn't care when one of them went missing. The newspapers never printed their names. One night, her friend Ilu disappeared. The police said she had probably run away. But Wana'ka knew better. Ilu had been seen last with a group of oil workers who came into town on the weekends, men who looked at native women like they were something to be used and discarded. When Wana'ka went to the station demanding they search for her friend, the officer behind the desk barely glanced up. "She's just another Indian girl," he muttered. It was then that Wana'ka realized, if she wanted justice, she would have to take it herself. Wana'ka gathered every woman she knew, mothers who had lost daughters, sisters searching for answers. Together, they marched through the streets, their voices rising in a storm of grief and fury. They painted murals of the missing, their faces staring down from brick walls like silent prayer. They wrote letters called journalists, refused to be erased. And then, one night, Wana'ka found Elu. Her body was dumped by the side of a highway, bruised and lifeless, her once vibrant hair matted with dried blood. But Wana'ka did not break. She kneeled beside her friend, pressing her hand into the cold earth, and whispered, "You are not forgotten. The fight was far from over, but now there was no turning back." Years later, Wana'ka stood on the steps of the courthouse, surrounded by the women who had become her family. They held signs, their faces marked with determination. The world was finally listening. Laws were being changed, investigations reopened. The missing were no longer invisible. Wana'ka looked up at the sky, where the spirits of her ancestors danced in the wind. She was still here, and she would never be silent again. But justice was a slow beast. Wana'ka knew the system was not built to protect women like her. She needed more than just words. She needed action. She began to gather evidence, documenting every missing girl, every ignored case. The deeper she dug, the more she realized the scale of the problem. Government officials, corporate executives, even law enforcement officers, some were complicit. Some were predators themselves. She went undercover, risking her life to infiltrate circles where native girls were being trafficked. The closer she got to the truth, the more dangerous it became. She received threats, warning her to stop. But Wana'ka refused to back down. The spirits of the missing called to her in dreams, their whispers guiding her forward. One night, as she was leaving a protest, she felt the presence of someone following her. A black car trailed her down the empty street. Her pulse quickened. She knew she was being watched. Before she could react, the car screeched to a halt, and masked men jumped out. They grabbed her, shoving her into the back seat. For hours she was held in a dark room, questioned by men who demanded to know what she had uncovered. But Wana'ka was no longer the scared girl who had once cowered in silence. She spat in their faces, daring them to try and break her. When they realized she would not speak, they let her go with a warning. "Disappear, or next time you won't be so lucky." But she did not disappear. Instead, she went public. She released the names she had gathered, the evidence she had found. She called out the corruption at the highest levels. The nation was forced to pay attention. Protests erupted across the country, demanding action. The world could no longer look away. And finally, after years of struggle, changes began. New laws were passed. Investigations were launched. The guilty were arrested. But for Wana'ka, the fight was never about revenge. It was about remembrance, about honoring the voices that had been stolen. As she stood before a gathering of her people, she spoke the names of the lost into the wind. And for the first time in a long time, the land felt lighter, as if the ancestors were listening. The fight was not over, but Wana'ka had lit a fire that would never be extinguished.